Alright, so as you guys know, I've committed to covering all of the Steven Universe comics ever released. Now, I did make that commitment before looking at the page for Steven Universe comics on the Steven Universe wiki in its entirety, and there's a lot more of them than I realized, but I'm going to keep to it because, frankly, they all seem pretty interesting. As with the first ongoing series of Steven Universe comics from Kaboom Studios, I'm treating every review of these issues of the second ongoing series, just known as Steven Universe Ongoing, just as seriously as I did every review of every episode of the show. So, hopefully my viewer base will treat them just as seriously as well, because I need views. Now, I did have some choices going from the first Kaboom series onto all of the other Steven Universe comic book content. There's some mini-series, some one-shots, and some graphic novels. But I did decide to just move on to Steven Universe Ongoing, the second series of Steven Universe comics, main series of Steven Universe comics, even though some of those other comics were released before the start of this. But there's a lot of these. If I'm remembering correctly, there's like 36 or 37 of them, and the series is technically still ongoing. Like, from what I understand, they haven't, canceled it yet officially, so there could still be more. I don't know, they could still be coming out with more at some point. I just feel like going from the first main series of comics, I should move into the second main series of comics to get a feel for how things changed. But I did look ahead at some of the very brief descriptions of these issues on the wiki, and it looks like you get several slice of lifey kinds of stories, and then a gem lore type of story. So maybe after each gem lore type of story, I'll mix it up by covering some stuff from one of the miniseries or something. I'm not sure yet, I'm playing this by ear. That said, this was, I think, a pretty good place to start off this series. Unlike the first series, these don't have individual titles. They also don't have mini-comics or anything either, which kind of bummed me out, but that's beside the point. So this is just issue number 1, and in this issue, while hanging out with Peridot and Lapis at the barn, Steven finds a baby bird that seems to have fallen from its nest. Steven, being Steven, of course, wants to save the baby bird, and when a local wildlife group says that it's probably just a common species and therefore they can't take it because they need to devote their resources towards helping endangered species, he takes it upon himself to ensure that it survives. And by he takes it upon himself, I mean Peridot and Lapis help, of course, because they're his friends. Peridot has this humorous subplot throughout the entire thing going where her main motivating factor in helping the bird is that she hopes it'll grow super big and it can do stuff for her, because she's Peridot, of course she is. Whereas Lapis is more concerned with just making sure that Steven is happy by the end of this endeavor. And they do succeed, and we see sort of a time-lapse montage of them feeding the bird, and over time it grows up, gets healthy, becomes a full-size version of whatever kind of bird this is. I didn't recognize it off the top of my head. So it seems like this one actually takes place over quite a long period of time, which I thought was pretty cool. We don't really get an indication of how long. I mean, I guess you could tell from, the maturation cycle of this specific bird species, if you know what it is, but aside from that, there's not really anything. And in the end, they realize they do have to let this bird go. What did they name it? Susan, I think? Is that what they named the bird? It was something cute like that. But they do have to let the bird go, and Steven is reluctant at first, but realizes it's for the best. And he calls Lapis and Peridot the bird's moms, implying that he considers himself the bird's dad, which is very cute. Overall, that's the best way I can describe this issue. It was very cute, very wholesome. And it ends on a particularly wholesome note when Steven, he's so worked up because he doesn't know if he'll ever see the bird again. And that, of course, gets to him. He's Steven. But Lapis reassures him by taking him out a little bit into the more wooded area near the barn and showing that the bird didn't go really far because the rest of the bird's family is right there. And he can basically see his surrogate child whenever he wants, and it was very cute. And he called himself a princess when the bird lands on his hand. It was adorable. And everybody felt in character here. Peridot felt very Peridot. Steven's caring nature really came through. And Lapis, you could tell she probably wouldn't have cared much about this bird if not for the fact that Steven cared about it. But you could tell she really cared about Steven, which is very in character for her. And I liked it a lot. I thought this was really good. And I kind of liked that, even though it's not really a message that kids need to hear, the story did kind of address that whole letting people in your life go, letting your kids go, empty nest kind of thing, right? In a way that felt very in step with how this show tends to deal with stuff. We saw Steven take a risk by letting go of this creature, I won't say person, it's a bird, this creature that he cares about, not knowing if he's ever going to see any reward from them going out into the world, but then he does receive a reward in the end because he was willing to take that risk and let them become their own, again, I'm not going to say person because it's a bird, but bird, right? Also, he uses gender-neutral they-them pronouns for the bird throughout the entire thing, which I feel is very in character for Steven not knowing the gender of a creature that he's bonded with, right? Overall, again, just a very wholesome story that felt like the kind of slice-of-life-y sort of thing that I think fans wanted to see more of in the show. Like, I didn't mind him as much as some fans did, but even I got kind of tired of the Townie episodes by the end, because we had characters who were important to the plot, but weren't here every week. And we barely followed them. Instead, we followed random characters from town. And then those random characters from town barely played any role in the finale of the series, like I thought they might. All of that time could have gone towards showing Steven being friends with Lapis and Peridot, characters who are supposed to be very close friends to him. We could have spent more time with them at the barn, seeing how they live and what their bond is like, instead of seeing Onion doing a weird thing. Onion doing a weird thing was probably the better Townie episode type of formula, frankly, but you still get my point. This comic gave us that, and I really appreciate that. But, and this is going to sound weird, considering how much I criticized the first Steven Universe Kaboom Studios series of comics, but this one felt kind of safe in comparison. The art is much more in line with what you'd see in the show, just more hand-drawn-y, right? And it is basically exactly the kind of plot that at least some of the fan base was asking for. But it didn't really push any boundaries. It didn't try to be anything more than just the bare bones of what one of those plots might have been. And granted, these are level 2 canon in a show with really strong lore arcs. Taking risks is pretty gosh darn risky in a series like this, but even though I didn't like a lot of the first series of comics, they did have some of that early weirdness that I liked about the show, back before it kind of fell into its final rhythm, if that makes sense. And granted, I don't know the names of all the people who worked on that series off the top of my head, but looking at the credits for this issue, at least, of this series, none of the names jumped out at me as people who worked on that series. And there's like a 2-year time skip. It's not the right word. This series came out like 2 years after the end of that series or something like that. I would have liked to have seen the same creative staff come back for this series, knowing more about the show and having more experience under their belts as creators, and tried to do some of the same kinds of stuff that they did in that series, just better. And frankly, I would have liked to have seen them grow with the series longer than they did. Like, this was not bad, don't get me wrong. I just feel like it's not as interesting as it could be. But it's very possible that with this very simple story, they're just easing us into this series, and that things will get more interesting and creative as we go. And I certainly hope that's the case. But even if they don't, this is still perfectly fine. It's a perfectly fine little slice of life, Steven Universe. Adventure is too strong a word, but you get my point. The art is cute and charming, and at the very least, I can always tell what's going on in these panels, unlike the panels from the previous series. And while I do miss the mini comics and the little art pieces that were stuck in after the main story in those issues, this was, from what I could tell, a little bit longer, and was therefore able to decompress its storytelling a little bit, and therefore felt like a fuller story than basically any of those first series issues did, save for the ones that were more than one part. Was there more than one story that was more than one part? I don't even remember. See, those were pretty forgettable. This, on the contrary, despite being less out there, I think is going to stick with me longer. It's a mixed bag. There are things that I could see some people liking more about the first series, even the first impressions of the first series, than they would like about the first impressions of this one. But I definitely feel like this one has the potential to be what the show wasn't always, but that fans kind of wanted it to be. Assuming it goes in the direction that it feels like it's going to go from this story and from the few summaries that I read reading ahead. That got very rambly there at the end, and I apologize. This is a good story, though. This is a good issue. It's a good comic book. You should read it if you can. My ramblings should not deter you from doing so. My hang-ups are my own. But as per usual, if you have read the first issue of Steven Universe Ongoing, I would of course like to know what you think of it. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.